My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I am 35 years old, and I lead Burkina Faso. But today, I'm not speaking to you as a president. I'm speaking to you as your African brother, who has something to tell you that no African leader has dared to say before. For 400 years, we have been separated. You were stolen from us, taken across an ocean, and forced to build a nation with your blood, sweat, and brilliance. But here's what they never told you, and here's what I'm here to tell you today. You were never forgotten. You were never abandoned. And now it's time for us to reconnect in a way that will change everything. What I'm about to share with you will shock you, inspire you, and maybe even anger you. But most importantly, it will show you possibilities that they never wanted you to see. I'm going to tell you about secret meetings that happened in the shadows, about phone calls that changed everything, about a plan that's already in motion to reunite our scattered family in ways that will reshape the global balance of power. Stay with me for the next 30 minutes, my brothers and sisters, because this conversation will change how you see Africa, how you see America, and how you see your own unlimited power. Let me tell you about a conversation that happened 2 years ago that set everything in motion. It was 3 a.m. in Ouagadougou, and I couldn't sleep. I was dealing with the pressure of running a country, fighting terrorism, challenging French colonial control. I turned on my computer and started watching videos of what was happening in America. I saw George Floyd. I saw Breonna Taylor. I saw young black Americans in the streets demanding justice, demanding equality, demanding the basic human dignity that should never have to be demanded. And as I watched those protests, something hit me like lightning. I was looking at myself. I was looking at my soldiers who fight against foreign occupation. I was looking at my people who refuse to accept that poverty is our permanent condition. The same fire burning in Minneapolis was burning in Ouagadougou. The same determination I saw in Detroit was the same determination I see in my young revolutionaries here in Burkina Faso. That night I called my grandmother. She's 89 years old, the keeper of our family's oral history. I told her what I had seen, and I asked her something I had never asked before. Grandmother, when our people were taken across the ocean, did we ever stop believing they were still our family? She was quiet for so long, I thought she had fallen asleep. Then she said something that changed my entire understanding of who we are and what we represent. Ibrahim, she said, every night for 400 years, African mothers have looked at the stars and wondered if their stolen children were looking at the same stars. Every harvest season, we set aside food for family members who might never come home, but who we never stopped claiming as ours. Every celebration, we sing songs for the voices that were silenced but never forgotten. Then she said something that made me cry. We never stopped waiting for you to remember who you are. That's when I realized that this separation between continental Africans and African Americans wasn't natural. It was engineered, maintained, and enforced by people who understood that our unity would threaten their power. And that's when I decided to do something about it. 6 months after that conversation with my grandmother, something extraordinary happened. I received a letter that would change the course of my presidency, and maybe the course of history. The letter came from Dr. Aisha Williams, a professor of African Studies at Howard University in Washington, D.C. But this wasn't an academic correspondence. This was a deeply personal message from a sister who had found her way home. Dr. Williams had spent 3 years tracing her family genealogy. Through DNA testing, oral histories, and historical records, she had traced her lineage back to the Mossi Kingdom, right here in Burkina Faso. She had identified the village where her ancestors lived before they were captured and enslaved. She had even found the names of great-great-grandparents she never knew existed. But here's what broke my heart about her letter. She wrote, "Mr. President, I know where I come from now. I found my village, I found my people, I found my history. But I don't know how to come home. I don't know how to bridge the gap between who I was before slavery and who I've become after 400 years in America. I don't know if there's still a place for me in the land of my ancestors." I read that letter 17 times, and each time I felt the same overwhelming emotion: shame. Shame that this brilliant woman, this descendant of our people, felt like a stranger in her own ancestral homeland. Shame that we had allowed centuries of separation to convince our family members that they were no longer welcome at the table. That night, I did something unprecedented. I picked up my phone and called Howard University. I asked to speak with Dr. Aisha Williams directly. When she answered, I said something that shocked her. "Dr. Williams, this is Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. I received your letter, and I have one thing to tell you. You are not a stranger here. You are a daughter returning home, and we have been waiting for you." The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. Dr. Williams told me about her life as a black woman in America, the constant struggle to prove her worth, the exhaustion of being the only black person in academic spaces, the pain of success that felt hollow because it required her to distance herself from her community to be accepted by others. But then she told me something that gave me hope. She said that when she discovered her African roots, something changed inside her. For the first time in her life, she felt connected to something bigger than American systems of success and failure. She felt connected to a story that began long before slavery, and could continue long after the effects of slavery were healed. That's when I made her a promise that would launch everything that's happening today. I promised her that she would not be the last African American to feel disconnected from Africa. I promised her that we would build bridges, not just for her, but for every member of our scattered family who wanted to come home. What I'm about to tell you was supposed to remain confidential, but I believe you have the right to know what's been happening behind the scenes. After my conversation with Dr. Williams, I started a project that I called The Reunion. Not officially, not through government channels, but quietly, carefully, strategically. I began reaching out to successful African Americans across every field you can imagine. Business leaders, technology innovators, medical professionals, educators, artists, activists. I wasn't reaching out as a politician looking for support. I was reaching out as a family member, wanting to reconnect with relatives who had been scattered by historical trauma. The first person who responded was Marcus Johnson, a software engineer from Oakland, California. Marcus had been following my presidency and was intrigued by our Pan-African vision. When I contacted him directly, he was shocked. African presidents don't call random black Americans, he told me later. But I explained to Marcus that he wasn't random. His great-grandmother had been born in West Africa before being brought to America. His success in technology wasn't separate from African innovation. It was a continuation of it. His struggles with racism in Silicon Valley weren't different from our struggles with neo-colonialism in Africa. They were the same struggle happening in different places. Marcus agreed to visit Burkina Faso, not as a tourist, but as a returning family member. What happened during his 2-week visit changed both of our perspectives forever. On his first day, I took Marcus to meet my technology team. These are young Burkinabe innovators who are building solutions for African problems with limited resources but unlimited creativity. Marcus expected to find people who needed his help. Instead, he found peers who challenged his thinking and expanded his vision of what was possible. By the end of his first week, Marcus wasn't just visiting Africa, he was investing in it. Not charity, not aid, but real partnership. He co-founded a fintech company with my tech team, building financial tools for African communities and the global diaspora. But what transformed him most wasn't business, it was belonging. He told me, for the first time, I wasn't the token black hire. I was just a professional among other black professionals. I felt normal, truly normal, for the first time. That's when I realized we weren't just building partnerships, we were healing centuries-old wounds of separation. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Dr. Michael Thompson, a top cardiovascular surgeon from Chicago, told me, "I've spent my career proving black excellence in medicine, but I've never had the chance to just be excellent without proving it first. What if we came home to build our own rooms of excellence?" We spoke for 4 hours about African-built medical schools, hospitals rooted in cultural competence, and African Americans returning not as donors, but as innovators. By the end, Dr. Thompson committed 6 months to Burkina Faso and promised to bring others like him. That promise sparked a network. He introduced me to Dr. Keisha Williams, a renewable energy engineer eager to build clean energy in Africa without US red tape. She connected me to Robert Jackson, a financial analyst who linked African liberation to Black American empowerment. Robert introduced me to Angela Davis Brown, an education specialist whose methods for Black American students could be scaled to millions in Africa. Each link added more. These were not people running from America. They were grateful for their success, but Africa gave them the chance to create something bigger than individual achievement. As Dr. Williams said, in America, change crawls. In Africa, we can build the future from the ground up. That's when I understood. This wasn't about aid or investment. It was about building a brain trust, a global black network of excellence, capable of accelerating Africa's rise in ways no outside system ever could. The secret meeting. 6 months after my first conversation with Dr. Thompson, I made a decision that could have been career suicide if it had gone wrong. I decided to host a private virtual summit with 50 of the most accomplished African Americans I had connected with over the previous months. The meeting was scheduled for 2 hours on a Saturday morning. It lasted 8 hours. I opened the meeting with a simple introduction. My brothers and sisters, I have brought you together because I believe we are living through a historical moment that happens maybe once every 500 years. We have the opportunity to reunite a family that was scattered by slavery and to build something together that neither of our communities could build alone. Then I presented them with a vision that was bold beyond anything any African leader had proposed before. I told them about my dream of an Africa that processed its own resources instead of exporting raw materials. An Africa that manufactured its own goods instead of importing finished products. An Africa that developed its own technology instead of depending on solutions designed for other markets. But I also told them that this vision was impossible without the expertise, networks, and resources of the African diaspora. I told them that African Americans had skills and knowledge that couldn't be bought with development aid or foreign investment. I told them that what we needed wasn't their money, it was their minds. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Marcus Johnson, the software engineer from Oakland, announced that he was ready to relocate to Burkina Faso permanently to build the African tech sector from the ground up. Dr. Thompson committed to establishing a medical school in partnership with 3 African universities, specifically designed to train doctors who understood both modern medical techniques and traditional African healing practices. Dr. Williams presented a comprehensive plan for renewable energy development across West Africa, powered by African American engineering expertise and African natural resources. Robert Jackson outlined a financial framework that would allow African Americans to invest directly in African development projects, bypassing traditional aid organizations and creating wealth for both communities simultaneously. But the most powerful moment of the meeting came when Angela Davis Brown stood up and said something that brought tears to my eyes. For my entire career, I've been trying to save black children in America from educational systems that were never designed for their success. But what if we stopped trying to fix broken systems and started building new ones? What if we created educational models in Africa that could then be exported back to black communities in America? What if we stopped being defensive about our children's potential and started being offensive about their excellence? By the end of that meeting, we had commitments totaling $75 million in investment, partnerships spanning 7 African countries, and a network of African American professionals who were ready to relocate, invest, and collaborate in ways that would have been unimaginable just 1 year earlier. But more than the money, more than the projects, we had created something that hadn't existed for centuries, a direct connection between African leadership and African American expertise that didn't depend on government approval, media coverage, or institutional permission. The opposition awakens. Of course, not everyone was happy about what we were building. Within weeks of our secret meeting, I started receiving pressure from sources I hadn't expected. The French ambassador to Burkina Faso requested an urgent meeting to discuss my expanding international activities. The World Bank delayed approval of a development loan that had been moving smoothly through their system. American news outlets began publishing articles questioning my radical agenda and warning about inexperienced diaspora involvement in African development. But the pressure wasn't just institutional, it was personal. Several of the African Americans who had publicly discussed partnerships with me reported strange experiences. Dr. Thompson was questioned by his hospital board about potential conflicts of interest with his African activities. Marcus Johnson was asked by his Silicon Valley investors whether his African projects might dilute his focus on his American business. Angela Davis Brown received a visit from federal education officials who wanted to discuss her international educational activities. Robert Jackson found that some of his financial clients were suddenly concerned about his African connections. The message was clear. This connection between African leadership and African American expertise was getting too real, too powerful, too threatening to people who profited from our separation. That's when I received a phone call that made me understand exactly what we were up against. The call came at 2 a.m. from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, I heard a voice with a French accent that introduced himself as a concerned friend who wanted to give me some advice. President Traoré, the voice said, you're a young leader with a bright future ahead of you, but you're making some choices that could complicate that future. Your activities with African Americans are being watched very carefully by people who have the power to make your presidency very difficult. I asked him what he meant by activities with African Americans, and his response chilled my blood. We know about the meetings. We know about the investments. We know about the plans you're making with people who don't understand the complexities of African development. These people may be successful in America, but Africa is different. Africa requires experienced guidance. Africa requires proven partnerships. Africa requires stability. Then he said something that made me realize we were dealing with forces that would do anything to maintain control. President Traoré, Thomas Sankara had similar ideas about African independence and diaspora connections. You know what happened to him. You wouldn't want to make the same mistakes he made. The threat was unmistakable. But here's what this concerned friend didn't understand about me. And here's what he didn't understand about the movement we were building. We had already crossed the point of no return. We had already tasted what connection felt like. We had already seen what was possible when artificial barriers were removed. Fear has never been my motivator. Justice has. And the justice of reuniting our scattered family was worth any risk. The breakthrough moment. Despite the pressure, despite the threats, despite the institutional opposition, something beautiful was happening that no one could stop. The partnerships we had formed were working. Marcus Johnson's fintech company had grown to 25,000 users across 6 African countries in just 4 months. Dr. Thompson's medical training program had attracted applications from 500 African American healthcare professionals who wanted to work in Africa. Dr. Williams's renewable energy projects were generating clean electricity in rural communities that had never had reliable power. But more than the projects, more than the success stories, something deeper was happening. African Americans were visiting Africa, not as tourists or aid workers, but as returning family members. And Africans were welcoming them, not as foreign experts, but as siblings who had been away too long. I'll never forget a conversation I had with a young woman named Keisha Robinson from Atlanta. Keisha was a marketing executive who had come to Burkina Faso to explore business opportunities. On her last day, she asked to meet with me privately. President Traoré, she said, I need to tell you something that might sound crazy. I'm 32 years old. I've been successful in America by every measure that matters. I have a good job, a nice house, financial security. But in the 5 days I've been here, I felt something I've never felt before in my life. I asked her what she meant, and her answer captured everything we had been trying to build. For the first time in my life, I felt normal. I felt like my success wasn't surprising. I felt like my presence wasn't questioned. I felt like I belonged in rooms of power and influence without having to prove that I deserved to be there. I felt like I was home. That's when I knew that what we were building wasn't just about economics or politics. It was about healing. It was about wholeness. It was about giving people permission to be excellent without having to constantly explain why their excellence was possible. The global impact. The success of our African American partnership started attracting attention from unexpected sources. Brazilian leaders of African descent reached out to explore similar connections. Caribbean nations started inquiring about expanding our model to include their populations. Even African communities in Europe began asking how they could participate in what we were building. But the most significant development came from within the United States itself. I started receiving messages from African American organizations, historically black colleges and universities, black professional associations, and black business networks. They weren't just interested in individual partnerships, they were interested in systematic collaboration that could benefit entire communities. That's when I realized that what we had started as a conversation between Burkina Faso and African Americans had the potential to become a movement that could reshape the relationship between Africa and its global diaspora. My vision for our future. Let me paint you a picture of what I see when I imagine the future we're building together. I see African American students studying at universities in Lagos, Accra, and Nairobi, not as foreign exchange students, but as continental Africans accessing their educational heritage. I see African students studying at Howard, Morehouse, and Spelman, not as international students, but as diaspora Africans reconnecting with their families' achievements. I see African American professionals who see Africa not as a continent to help, but as a market to engage, a community to build with, a home to invest in. I see African professionals who see African American networks not as foreign connections, but as family resources that can accelerate our development. I see African American retirees who choose to spend their golden years in Ghana or Kenya or Burkina Faso not as expats or missionaries, but as elders returning home to share their wisdom with their community. I see African American entrepreneurs who launch businesses that serve both continental African markets and African American communities, creating economic bridges that strengthen both sides of the Atlantic. But most importantly, I see young people on both sides of the ocean who grow up understanding that the Atlantic Ocean scattered us, but never separated us, that slavery disrupted our connection but never destroyed it, that we are one people who have survived everything the world threw at us and are now ready to build everything the world told us was impossible. The personal transformation. I want to share something deeply personal with you about how this journey has changed me. When I became president of Burkina Faso, I thought my mission was to liberate my country from neocolonial control. I thought my job was to fight terrorism, improve the economy, and restore our sovereignty. Those are still important goals, but I now understand they're part of a much larger mission. My real mission is to heal a 400-year-old wound. My mission is to prove that families separated by oceans and centuries can still recognize each other. My mission is to demonstrate that when scattered people come together with shared purpose, they become unstoppable. Every conversation I have with African Americans teaches me something new about resilience, innovation, and the power of maintaining dignity under impossible circumstances. Every partnership we build shows me new possibilities for what African excellence can look like when it's not constrained by colonial limitations. But more than anything, connecting with our diaspora family has reminded me of something I had forgotten. We are not a small, poor country trying to survive in a hostile world. We are part of a global community of African people who have skills, resources, networks, and power that, when combined, can change the trajectory of human history. The moment of choice. So here we are, my brothers and sisters. We have proven that the connection between continental Africa and African Americans is not just possible, it's powerful. We have demonstrated that when artificial barriers are removed, natural bonds reassert themselves quickly and strongly. We have shown that African Americans don't need to choose between their American identity and their African heritage, and that continental Africans don't need to choose between African authenticity and global engagement. What we've built together in just 2 years is proof that the future we've been told was impossible is not just possible, it's inevitable. But inevitability still requires choice. It still requires courage. It still requires commitment from people who are willing to act on possibilities rather than wait for permission. The door between Africa and African America is now open wider than it has been in 400 years. The question is, will you walk through it? My direct challenge to you. Here's my direct challenge to every African American listening to this message. You have spent centuries proving that you could succeed in systems that were never designed for your success. You have proven it beyond any reasonable doubt. You have excelled in every field, overcome every barrier, achieved greatness despite obstacles that would have crushed weaker people. You have nothing left to prove to America or to the world. The question now is, what do you want to build? I am offering you the opportunity to build systems of excellence designed by Black minds for Black communities. I am offering you the chance to be founders instead of always having to fight for inclusion. I am offering you the opportunity to be normal in your excellence instead of constantly exceptional. I am not asking you to abandon America. America is part of your story, part of your strength, part of who you are. I am asking you to embrace Africa as the other part of your story, the other source of your strength, the other piece of who you can become. You don't have to choose between America and Africa. You can be bridges between them. You can be connectors, facilitators, translators who help both communities understand what they can learn from each other and build together. But I am asking you to make a choice. I am asking you to decide whether you want to remain spectators to African development or participants in African transformation. I am asking you to decide whether you want to continue to be successful within other people's systems or co-creators of new systems that reflect our values